I had my camera converted to infrared, so I took it out for some nature photography. And man, is it weird. Now, I actually got some shots that I do really like, but I'll come on to those a little bit later. So this was my Canon 6D. Well, I suppose it still is my Canon 6D, but now I've had it converted to shoot infrared images. I actually had this converted a while ago, and I have done a video on this before when I shot some black and white landscapes on a holiday to the Isle of Skye. But since then it has kind of just sat on a shelf, and I haven't really thought about picking it up and taking it outside to try my hand at weird photography again. And that's kind of a shame, because I liked some of those sky images enough to print them massive on aluminium and put them up on my office wall. So I did finally brush the dust off and take it out for some photography. And I'd originally planned on this being all about infrared macro photography, but to be honest, my actual macro photos with this, they didn't really work. Take this shot as an example. It's really nothing to write home about. And I do think that the actual infrared is to blame here. So here's what I think is happening. The camera sensor is now tuned to capture infrared light. Now, the greenery and plants and leaves, that actually reflects infrared light, so that's why it appears as bright white when captured on an infrared film, or in this case a digital camera. And that makes it a lot of fun because you can get some really interesting results. But the sort of macro photography that I was doing on that day really involved filling the frame with those plants and flowers. And of course, in infrared, that basically just meant filling the frame with a load of white. In a color image, this shot would be a nice, colorful flower against a green background. But in infrared, it's just 50 shades of gray, and not in a fun way. And the same thing is true here, and here. I shot this image recently of some wood sorrel, and while I suppose fundamentally this image is just lots of green, it actually works because there's lots of different tones of greens and yellows that allows for differentiation between the different leaves. But infrared strips out all of that colour, just leaving us with the white. And it's why this shot of green ivy simply doesn't work in the same way, no matter how much I've tried to whack up that contrast. I did try to experiment a little bit by trying to angle my image so that the subject was framed instead against a dark background like a pathway or just some dirt. Because then that background essentially just turns black, and as a result our subject, the flower or a leaf, will really stand out. It worked well here, I think, and I played with the composition to get this central flower framed between these others, which I think works quite well. I also framed these fuchsias against the pathway in the background to allow them to stand out. The same fuchsias against a background of other greenery simply doesn't work. I did a few others that kind of worked. Finding things with more texture, like the spikiness of these plants, looked pretty good, and these leaves looked okay as well. But generally focusing in on flowers and leaves didn't really seem to be working for me. So I explored Edinburgh's Botanic Gardens a bit more to look for other shots that would work in infrared. I generally found that any natural scene that also included a non-natural element worked best. That could be something like a pathway, which, because it's a non-natural element, isn't reflecting back the same amount of infrared light. As a result, it shows up as black against all of the white of the natural surroundings. Prime example, this image of the Botanic Gardens main building, which looks really stark and contrasty against its surroundings. I love the look of this image with the bright leaves and this dark path arcing through the scene. And similarly, the dark path works really well cutting through the greenery here. I don't think it worked well here just because it's such a busy scene, so there's no real composition, it's just a mess of leaves. But I did think that this shot worked out a little bit nicer. I do really like this image of this person sitting on a bench under all these trees. The shot is dominated by the white of the foliage, but this figure is framed nicely against the darker patch, and that's what allows him to stand out in this image. I then found this tree, which made a nice enough shot by itself, but I also snapped a park worker as they walked past, which added a bit more to the composition. And these people walking here makes for a nice image, and I actually quite like the juxtaposition of this roadwork sign in amongst all of this nature. I wandered around and snapped a few other shots in the Botanic Gardens, but it was when I actually left the gardens and wandered into nearby Inverleith Park that things started to pick up even more. And it actually started very quickly with this guy on the bench with his dog. I love this scene too, of these trees with the moody clouds overhead and the Tower of Fetis School poking out with the graffitied buildings at the bottom. I went for a panoramic crop here, which I think works really well with this wide scene. By going quite narrow, it just strips out a lot of that empty white, which doesn't really add anything to the image at all. Again, I found that pathways worked well, with the uniform line of trees against the dark path lending itself well to infrared here. And this snaking wooden walkway caught my eye too, but I actually found that holding the camera as high as I could really emphasized that curve even more. In my resulting image, the darkness of that walkway works really well against the brightness of the green reeds either side. After this, I focused on some landscapes overlooking Edinburgh, especially when I saw this couple enjoying the view. I love this image, and I loved capturing them again when I saw them walking around the pond. I snapped these when I was down there too, and usually I don't really think pictures of people work all that well in infrared, but these actually came out better than I expected. But my absolute favourite images of the day I took on my way back. I saw this scene overlooking this parkland with a majestic big tree and Edinburgh in the distance. It's a scene that didn't look all that impressive with the fairly dreary conditions that I could actually see with my own eyes, but the view took on a whole different look in infrared. I really love how the field has turned completely white here, with the birds on the left appearing as these black dots. And you can still make out the structures on Calton Hill and the now iconic silhouette of the Golden Turd on the right. The Golden Turd is what we call the shopping centre in Edinburgh because of that weird spiral that looks like the poo emoji. Really divides opinion in the city. To be honest, I quite like it. I really love this image, and it is one of my favourite black and white images I've taken in some time. You'll notice too that I've again used a panoramic crop here to really focus on the main subjects in the scene. But I do also like this version taken from a slightly different vantage point, which uses these bulrushes as foreground interest and shows more of Edinburgh Castle in the background. I can't quite decide which version of this scene I like more, so if you have any strong opinions, then do please make sure to leave those in the comments below. But that does bring me to an end of this week's video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be honest, I was expecting this to be a lot more about macro photography, and I really just think that that isn't where infrared shines. But I have really enjoyed just sort of getting out and about with this camera, snapping away and seeing what other shots work really well. And it's a style of photography I'd really like to do a lot more of. So please do let me know if that's something you're interested in and if you'd be interested in seeing me do some more. Because if nobody cares, then I probably won't bother. But if you have enjoyed today's video, then do please give it a like and of course consider subscribing to my channel if you don't already, and I will see you next time.